Wizards released the decklist for the Final Fantasy precons last night, and I thought it would make for some fun Patreon content to review them. But as I was working my way through the lists, I felt like I was going mad. These decks are terrible. Not necessarily from a power level perspective, although there are some major issues there too, but they just don't make any sense whether considered individually or as a package. I don't usually talk about precons because they are not made for me. I'm a grumpy guy that plays way too much Commander and builds 3 decks a week. The only thing I would do with a precon is rip it apart. No, they are for beginners or players who enjoy having something that's mostly ready-made and only needs to be modified. They are for casuals, and that makes them an important access point into the format. Similarly, Universes Beyond, and particularly the Final Fantasy brand, are attracting new players to our game. I can think of multiple people that I know in real life who are currently not Magic players, but have told me that they will pick up the game once Final Fantasy comes around. And we also know that it's already the best-selling set of all time. So why do the precons suck so much? It just bothers me, so let's talk about it. And yeah, I will get a bunch of these names wrong. I'm sorry, I don't know Final Fantasy. The Science and Spellcraft deck is a white-blue-black list helmed by Yoshola, Knights Blessed. Yoshola is a 4-mana 2/4 with Vigilance, and at the beginning of each end step, if a player lost 4 or more life this turn, we draw a card. She also drains each opponent for 2 life when we cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater. Yoshola is a pretty strong commander that offers card draw and can put out significant damage every turn. However, her card draw effect is a bit tricky to use. Since it doesn't need us to cause the life loss, and it can trigger on every player's turn, our opponents are incentivized to focus their attention on us. If 4 damage, and hence the card draw, is happening either way, then it might as well be pointed at the player that benefits from it. A deck built around Yoshola wants to put emphasis on playing relatively high mana value non-creature spells as often as possible, as her life drain represents a necessary defensive line and can also enable us to force the card draws when our opponents aren't playing along. We also need to defend Yoshola, because she's just a big obvious target and our colors aren't the best at ramping, so if she gets killed a couple of times, we'll be struggling. Luckily, the colors she is in work great for this, as Esper excels at interaction and turning card draw into dangerous plays, particularly at instant speed, which also works great with our commander. So why are there 22 creatures in this deck? Most of these have no synergy with the commander, like Outbird, Emmet Selge, Krilli Baldesion, Summon Good King Morg XII or Urianger Ogurelt. You could genuinely cut more than 50% of the creatures in this deck from the list, and it would be a blanket improvement. But okay, I can kind of accept playing a bunch of creatures because at least creatures can attack for damage and trigger Yoshola. The bigger problem is that there are only 11 instants in the deck, with Sublime Epiphany and the Mesmeric Glare as its sole counterspells. This deck just doesn't have a good way to trigger Yoshola on our opponent's turn. Even the new instant specifically printed for this deck, Transpose, has Rebound, which is a keyword that lets us recast it on our own upkeep, meaning we are not doing it on anyone else's turn. There are almost as many sorceries as instants here, with multiple board wipes, but none of which even attempt to be one-sided. Keep in mind that the plurality of this deck is creatures, and even some of the sorceries are creatures like Lingering Souls and Rite of Replication. Then there's a huge package of 16 artifacts, 9 of which cost 2 mana or less, and so can't be used to trigger Yoshola. Then there are a handful enchantments to close out the list. The big problem here is that this is a deck that was built in a way that it can't really use its commander properly. There are not enough cards here to enable the kind of playstyle that Yoshola naturally encourages, and as a result, it's mostly just a pile of random cards that have a few pieces of synergy here and there, but can't form a coherent whole. I understand that precons intentionally leave room for improvements so that new players can easily get started on the process of deck building, But in this case, the deck doesn't just need to be improved, it needs to be reworked from the ground up. We can't just remove some of the creatures and add a bunch of counterspells, because then there isn't enough structural support for those counterspells. And despite all of this, the deck really needs its commander, because it doesn't have enough card draw without it. It's a complete mess. Also really quick, please give the video a thumbs up and check out my Patreon, link in the description. There's lots of bonus content on there, like for example a detailed look at each of the decks we're discussing today. The Revival Trance deck suffers from pretty much the exact same issue as Yoshola. This is a red, white and black deck with Terra, Herald of Hope as its commander. Terra, Herald of Hope, is a 3-mana 3/3. At the beginning of combat on our turn, we mill 2 cards and she gains flying until end of turn. Then, whenever Terra deals combat damage to a player, we may pay 2 mana to reanimate a creature with power 3 or less. This is a great set of abilities for a commander. Her first ability enables her second, by filling up the graveyard a bit and making it easier to get a hit in. And then her second ability allows her to mana cheat by paying 2 mana for creatures that should cost much more than that. So, naturally this deck is full of creatures, most of which have 3 power or less. Right? Well, out of its 35 creatures, 13 just straight up have more than 3 power and hence can't be reanimated by Terra. Then there are 11 we can technically reanimate, but that really suck to reanimate. Like bringing back Millikin just isn't really worth 2 mana, and reanimating Anger is very funny but also defeats the entire point of the card. Based on my assessment, this deck has around 11 creatures worth bringing back from the grave, and I'm being really generous there. Like, I'm including the sad robot in those 11, because if I don't, I will be the sad robot, as there's just nothing to reanimate in our reanimator deck. This is another list that just mostly ignores its commander, because Wizards didn't include enough reasonable targets for the commander to be useful. They even made a new card for this deck, called the Warring Triad, which is a 3-mana 5/5 with some text, who cares. It's an overstated, undercosted creature in the understated, overcosted creature reanimation deck. There are a ton of possible inclusions for this deck that they just ignored, like Marionette Master, Threefold Thunderhawk, or Captain of the Watch. I don't know much about Final Fantasy, but I feel like it would be possible to make these fit thematically. There's a whole bunch of clowns in this deck. I'm just saying, you can make Captain of the Watch work. Instead, we get Sun Titan, which is a great card. But what is it doing here? Now, to be fair, this deck also plays other reanimation, which is probably how they expect players to bring the expensive creatures into play. But first of all, there isn't much of it, and we might just mill past it. And secondly, if this is just going to be a generic reanimation deck, then why does Terra have a power-based restriction? Other than that, this deck doesn't play much card draw or interaction and depends quite heavily on artifacts. I think this is completely unplayable. The 2 decks we just discussed are definitely the worst of the set, with the remaining 2 being decidedly better. Limit Break is a red-green-white deck led by Cloud X Soldier. Cloud X Soldier is a 4/4 that costs 5 mana and has haste. Whenever he enters, we can attach an equipment to him, and when he attacks, we draw a card for each equipped attacking creature we control. Then, if Cloud has 7 or more power, we create 2 treasure tokens. Cloud has a very straightforward game plan. Get equipments into play, attach them to creatures, and then swing in. What makes him interesting is that he prefers going wide, looking to attach equipments to multiple creatures instead of stacking them all on a single target. In that way, building a Cloud deck is very straightforward. We just need creatures and equipments. Ideally creatures and equipments that synergize with each other and create interesting gameplay patterns and provide agency and choice. But that's also not necessary. To function, the deck just needs literally any creatures and literally any equipments, and unfortunately that seems to be exactly the path that Wizards have taken. There are a variety of creatures here that don't really synergize with anything we are doing, like Hellkite Tyrant or Avalanche of Sector 7, and many of the equipments are less than stellar choices as well, like Behemoth Sledge or Skull Clamp. I'm not saying that Skull Clamp is a bad card, I just think it's a very strange choice for a deck that's about big creatures. It doesn't fit into its thematic expression. Setting that aside, this deck is quite alright, if maybe a bit low on card draw and ramp, which makes it very dependent on Cloud. But at least it has some removal and a good number of protection spells. Of course, the majority of the list are creatures and artifacts, which makes sense given the theme. I always assume that precons should be somewhat balanced amongst each other. They should play well against other precons, and especially so against precons from the same set. Precons are the foundation of our new bracket system as well, which definitely requires some consistency to make sense. Outliers in power, both when going too weak as well as too powerful, are a problem. And that's why the last Final Fantasy precon, Counter Blitz, baffles me. Counter Blitz is a green, white and blue deck, with Titus, Yuna's Guardian, as its commander. Titus is a 3-mana 3/3, who, at the beginning of our combat, lets us move a counter from a creature we control to another creature we control. Then, whenever a creature we control with a counter on it deals combat damage to a player, we draw a card and proliferate, but only once each turn. This is a great effect in great colors. It provides power and consistency and works well with a large range of cards and card types. And the deck is built to enable this, stacked to the brim with powerful counter-granting creatures and spells, as well as ways to gather resources along the way. Gyre Sage offers great mana, while Fathom Mage draws tons of cards, and Chocobo Knights acts as a low-cost, efficient overrun. The supporting pieces are also all there. Inspiring Call keeps the board alive, Damning Verdict is a one-sided sweeper, and there's even an offer you can't refuse in here to deal with any other problems. Rampant Rejuvenator, Bred for the Hunt, Hardened Scales. The list of synergistic pieces is near unending. Even many of the newly printed cards are absolutely incredible. Vaka, Devoted Guardian, is a great attacker that quickly builds a game-winning board. Protection Magic works incredibly well with Proliferate, and Sphere Grid is guaranteed to be a new staple in +1/+1 counter-based decks. To keep it simple, this deck is incredibly well built and powerful. It's not even remotely on the same playing field as Science and Spellcraft or Revival Trance, and it surely crushes Limit Break as well. I feel like if we ran 100 pods of these 4 decks competing, then Counter Blitz should win like 75 of them or even more. Oh, and remember how I pointed out that all of the other decks play a lot of artifacts? That wasn't just because I don't like mana rocks, but also because Counter Blitz has Bane of Progress in the list. There's a card in here that will instantly win the game against the Cloud deck. Yoshola probably just dies as well, since she plays a lot of enchantments on top of the artifacts. And it's not like we really need to try hard to deal with Revival Trance, but this will still ruin Terra's day. I honestly just can't believe that they printed Bane of Progress into this deck. It's a disproportionately powerful card that already wins a ton of Commander games by itself, but is specifically good against 2 of the 3 other decks. Maybe the decks aren't supposed to be played against each other, but I think that would be a really strange assumption, because that's something people do all the time. I see it constantly. Commander is a wonderful format because of how expressive it allows players to be. It's at its best when players are finding unique ways to explore their own ideas, building communities of synergies where everything has a clearly defined home. But Science and Spellcraft and Revival Trance completely fail at letting players experience this side of the game, as the decks don't support their own commander. Limit Break is fine, although a bit confused, but it mostly just gets completely hosed by Counter Blitz, a clear and definitive outlier and power level that the other decks just can't compete with. As an access point into the format, the Final Fantasy precons are a disaster, and I think that's a real shame. That's not to say that they don't have any value though. There are a lot of good reprints in all of them, And I think Limit Break and Counter Blitz are safe to recommend for purchase. But the other two I would stay far away from. Except for Tataru Taru. I love Tataru Taru. This is my new favorite card. And I want 500 copies of it. I wasn't really planning on making any content on the precons, but then inspiration struck me in the face violently by me getting annoyed. It was mostly annoyance that struck me in the face. And then I made a video. I wrote like 2,500 words because I got annoyed. I might have a problem. Anyways, now it's your problem. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. As always, don't forget to check out Patreon. There's a link down in the description where there's a bunch of bonus content, like, for example, the review of these deck lists in more detail. I mean, it's like 4 20-minute long videos, just like on top of this right here. And also there is like a deck tech, and it's just a bunch of shit. Honestly, I've been uploading way too much. I don't know, it's just so easy. It's so easy to click record and just upload. I feel like I've talked about this before. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys soon with a regular video. The video that was actually planned for today. We kind of snuck this one in the middle because, again, annoyance punched me in the face. I'll see you guys. Goodbye.